is it still procrastinating if you're being productive? Well, technically, yes. See, procrastination isn't just scrolling through TikTok to avoid uploading the receipts that you need to send to your accountant. Procrastination is also doing the dishes to avoid uploading the receipts that you need to send to your accountant. Yes, doing the dishes does need to be done. But if you're being productive doing the dishes in order to avoid another task that truly needs to be done or is a priority, you may be experiencing productive procrastination, or procrastivity as coined by Dr. Russell Ramsey. Procrastivity happens when you combine procrastination with a non-essential activity. And I'd be willing to bet dollars to donuts that if you are an ADHDer, you have procrastinated a time or 763 in your life. Shoot, I procrastinated today. Just as I was sitting down to write this episode, I got a message from my husband asking me if I could knock the water off the sunshade at some point today, and I decided that some point was right then because I wasn't in the mood to write. But as with all things ADHD, just because you are currently experiencing this behavior doesn't mean that things have to stay that way. And overcoming procrastivity can be very important if lack of progress or completing tasks is impacting our job, our productivity, or our relationships. That's why on today's episode of the ADHD Mompreneur, we are discussing why it is those of us with ADHD tend to procrastivate and give some tips to help us take action on those tasks that we really don't want to do. And really quick, before we dive into our procrastivity discussion, I would like to introduce myself just in case you're new here. I'm Christy Lingo, the ADHD Mompreneur. I'm an executive function and accountability coach for ADHD mom business owners looking to juggle building a successful business with raising their family. I'm a mom to 2 boys, and I've been an entrepreneur since 2009. I also have been diagnosed with ADHD. And all of these factors have brought me to where I am today and contributed to my desire to work with ADHD mom entrepreneurs. If you'd like to know more about my coaching programs, visit theadhdmompreneur.com. And while you're there, be sure to pick up my free 11 essential checklists for ADHD mompreneurs. Okay, so in order to understand why we procrastinate, it is important to do a quick review of why ADHDers tend to struggle with task initiation. Our brains rely on dopamine uptake to fuel our executive function, and ADHD brains have kind of spotty dopamine uptake. Sometimes we'll have plenty, like when we start a new hobby or when we're planning a vacation. And other times it's like pulling teeth for us to have any sort of task initiation. In fact, I think there are times when we would rather have our teeth pulled than to actually act on the task that we don't want to do. Which brings us to today's topic of procrastivity. Doing something that technically needs to be done, but we choose to do it in order to avoid something else that may be higher on the priority list. And why is it that we choose to do certain tasks over others when we procrastinate? Well, there's a couple of theories out there. First, the tasks we choose to do may have a low barrier to entry. These tasks are typically not hard to get started and have a low cognitive demand. Think mowing the lawn or doing the dishes. There are clear steps involved, so you don't have to recreate the wheel or solve any problems in order to complete this task or project. These tasks also tend to be physical, so they require less mental stress. These tasks also have an end point. When the lawn is mowed, you can see that the lawn has been mowed. When the dishes are done, you can see that the sink is clear. But when you write one email, there's a very good chance that you're going to get another email back, which would require another response. So there really isn't an end point. And knowing an end point or completing a task is important because completed tasks equal rewards. Neurodiverse or not, our brains are hardwired to seek out tasks, activities, and behaviors that will help us to release dopamine. And completing a task will release dopamine. But earning our dopamine reward for completing a task is a little harder to measure with things like paying your bills or doing your taxes or writing an email. And this may contribute to us leaning more towards tasks that will actually help to initiate this reward and dopamine boost. All right, so you may be thinking, okay, I understand why it is that I procrastinate, but what can I do about it? Well, that is precisely what we are going to talk about to wrap up today's episode. To start, know that there's going to be a fair amount of self-motivation and perhaps even a bit of brain rewiring that's going to need to happen to help get over your procrastivity tendencies. But thanks to neuroplasticity, we have the ability to learn, adapt, and change based on experiences, despite the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. The process of learning and practicing something new, like no longer using productive procrastination to avoid priority tasks, actually changes your brain. So every time you use one of the following strategies to make progress or complete a task that you've been avoiding, you are strengthening those new neural pathways. First up, break tasks down. I know I sound like a broken record, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. How's that for mixing metaphors? But seriously, sometimes our resistance to starting or working on a task is that the task or project just feels so big or overwhelming. But if we focus on a small part or portion of the task, it may be easier for us to start and complete that segment. For instance, instead of your to-do list saying something like, create a new website, it would have things like brainstorm pages I want on my website or pick out photographs I'd like to use on my website. Not only have we made a big, scary project much more accessible by breaking it down into smaller, more manageable pieces, we have also started to create those all-important, clear endpoints for the task. Another way to create clear endpoints? Set a start and stop goal. Remember, your brain is looking for a clear endpoint in order to get that sweet, sweet dopamine reward. Alas, if the project is so big and you don't think you're going to complete it, and you don't think you're going to get that sweet, sweet dopamine reward, it may be a little difficult for you to motivate yourself to start. But what if the goal is to work on said task or project for a specific amount of time versus until completion? Working through the time that you've set aside means that you do earn the reward for accomplishing your goal, because the goal is to work for a specific amount of time, not to complete the task. Next up, celebrate your progress, no matter how small. Spend a little time focusing on what you actually did accomplish during your work day or at the end of the day, rather than focusing on what you didn't do. Because focusing on the negative starts to solidify a negativity bias to this task or this type of task, impacting what you think you can and can't do. Remember we talked about those neural pathways? It works for negativity too. On the flip side, if you celebrate progress that you make on a blog post that you've been putting off writing or a phone call that you've been avoiding returning, you can create and strengthen positive neural pathways associated with that activity, which will then lead to positivity, reward, and dopamine benefits down the road. Next, create a launch sequence. Part of the reason it's easier for you to choose a task like doing the laundry is you already know all the steps that are involved in the process. And yes, not every load of laundry is going to be exactly the same, but typically the lead up to doing laundry is the same. You gather the clothes, you put the clothes in a basket, you take the basket to the washing machine, you put it in the washing machine, and so on. That is a launch sequence. You can also create a launch sequence to signal to your brain, hey, we're getting ready to write right now, or hey, it's time to reply to emails. I think this quote from ADHD coach Penny Kennedy sums up this idea perfectly. Think of your task as a block you need a ramp to get to. What do you need to do to get prepared and move into doing the task? For writing, this could be setting up your workspace, opening the laptop, getting sticky notes, pens and drink ready, opening a new document, and making a cover page. What sort of launch sequence could you create in order to signal to your brain, it's time to do this? And finally, use accountability to get over a motivational hurdle. Body doubling is an excellent form of accountability if you've got tasks that you're avoiding. In a typical body doubling session, whether it's a group or one-on-one, you will announce what it is that you plan to work on during that session, which helps to contribute to a sense of obligation of what you should be doing. Another form of accountability would be telling a friend or family member when you plan to work on a certain task and then asking them to check in on your progress. Or you could hire an accountability coach like me to help you decide what your priority tasks are, decide when you're going to work on them, and then follow up with you to see if you're making progress. I'm curious if you struggle with procrastivity and have any additional questions or a question about ADHD in general. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, you can drop any questions that you have in the comments down below. And if you are listening elsewhere, you can always send your questions to Christy at theadhdmompreneur.com. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit the follow or subscribe button so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes I have for you, like next week when I have an awesome conversation with Dr. Julie Schaefer all about ADHD and people pleasing. Trust me, you do not want to miss this one. Until then, keep making your ADHD journey part of your success story. If you're a business owning mom with ADHD, you're going to need to grab my free customizable essential checklists for ADHD mompreneurs by visiting bit.ly/checklists for ADHD mompreneurs or by following the link in the episode description. Do it now before you forget. Until next time.